Every culture on Earth has a version of the same creature. North America has Bigfoot. The Himalayas have the Yeti. Mongolia has the Almas. Australia has the Yowie. China has the Yeren. Scandinavia has trolls. Medieval Europe had the Woodwoes. Indonesia has the Orang Pendek. The Basque people have the Basajaun. Go to any continent except Antarctica, talk to the oldest communities you can find, and eventually someone will describe the same thing. A large, powerful, hairy, human-like being that lives at the edge of the wilderness. 30 or more separate traditions, many of them from cultures that had zero contact with each other for thousands of years. That pattern alone is strange. But what makes it worth talking about right now is a paper published in Science in July 2024 by a team at Princeton led by geneticist Joshua Akey. Because what that paper found changes the math on a question people have been asking for decades but never had the science to take seriously. The question is simple: what if those legends are not fiction? Not in the sense that Bigfoot is real and walking around Oregon right now, but in the sense that those stories started somewhere, that they are echoes, extremely old, distorted, exaggerated echoes of something that actually happened, something we now know happened for a very long time. Here is what the Princeton team found. Using a genetic tool called IBD mix, which works differently from anything before it because it does not rely on a supposedly clean reference population, they analyzed the genomes of 2,000 living humans alongside 3 Neanderthal genomes and 1 Denisovan genome. And the results were not incremental. They were a rewrite. We already knew Neanderthals and humans interbred. That was established back in 2010. The standard story was, about 50,000 years ago, humans migrated out of Africa, met Neanderthals somewhere in the Middle East, had a relatively brief period of contact, and moved on. One encounter, one chapter. Done. That story is now dead. What Akey's team found is that there were at least 3 separate waves of interbreeding. The first happened roughly 200 to 250,000 years ago. That is almost as old as our species itself. The second wave hit around 100 to 120,000 years ago. And the third, the one we already knew about, was the big migration 50 to 60,000 years ago. But the real breakthrough was not just finding 3 waves. It was finding them from the other direction. See, previous methods could only detect Neanderthal DNA in us. Akey's team figured out how to detect our DNA in them. And when they looked at the Neanderthal genomes, they found something nobody expected. The Vindija Neanderthal from Croatia carried 2.5% modern human DNA. The Altai Neanderthal from Siberia carried 3.7%. Think about what that means. We did not just take genes from them, they took genes from us. Both directions, for 200,000 years. As Akey put it, and this is a direct quote, "For the vast majority of human history, we've had a history of contact between modern humans and Neanderthals. That is not a brief encounter. That is a relationship. And it gets more interesting. When the team accounted for the human DNA sitting inside Neanderthal genomes, it forced a major correction. Previous estimates of the Neanderthal breeding population were around 3,400 individuals. After removing the human genetic signal that had been inflating their apparent diversity, that number dropped to about 2,400. 2,400 breeding individuals across all of Eurasia. You could fit the entire reproductive population of the Neanderthal species into a mid-sized movie theater. Akey said something else that I think deserves to sit with you for a second. He said, "I don't like to say extinction because I think Neanderthals were largely absorbed. Not wiped out, absorbed." He described it as waves crashing on a beach. Modern humans kept coming in small migrations, and each wave eroded the Neanderthal population a little more, mixing their genes into ours until the beach was gone. The species did not disappear, it dissolved. Now, here is where this gets relevant to Bigfoot. If humans and Neanderthals were interbreeding repeatedly across 200,000 years, they were not strangers to each other. They lived in the same landscapes. They competed for the same animals. They apparently had children together, more than once, more than in one place, more than in one era. These were real encounters between 2 different kinds of human beings. And we know something else about humans. We tell stories. It is arguably the defining thing we do. Language likely emerged somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 years ago. The Neanderthals themselves probably had spoken language too. A 2021 study found their ear anatomy was tuned to the same frequencies as human speech. They had the same FAXP2 gene variant we do. They made tools, buried their dead, created art on cave walls. These were not dumb animals, they were people. Different-looking people with massive brow ridges, barrel chests, short, powerful limbs, and possibly more body hair, but people. So imagine you are a band of Homo sapiens 50,000 years ago. You encounter a small group of these beings in a valley. They are shorter than you, but visibly stronger. Their faces look different. Their skulls are shaped differently. They speak maybe, but you cannot understand them. Some of your ancestors had children with theirs. And then, over centuries, they get rarer and rarer, until one day nobody has seen one in a generation. What do you do with that memory? You tell stories. Now, can a story survive 40,000 years? That is the real question, and the honest answer is, we do not know, but we do know more than you might think. In Australia, linguist Nicholas Reid and geographer Patrick Nunn have spent years studying Aboriginal oral traditions. What they found is, frankly, astonishing. They identified over 20 Aboriginal stories from different communities around the Australian coastline that describe a time when the sea was lower and land that is now underwater was dry. The stories name specific islands that were once connected to the mainland. They describe specific geographical features. And when Reid and Nunn compared those stories against known sea level data, the stories checked out. The geographical details match conditions from 7,000 to over 10,000 years ago. 400 generations of oral transmission without writing, and the stories stayed accurate. Reid said, and this is one of my favorite quotes in all of science, "It's quite gobsmacking to think that a story could be told for 10,000 years. It's almost unimaginable that people would transmit stories about things like islands that are currently underwater accurately across 400 generations." He explained it through what he called cross-generational scaffolding. In Aboriginal cultures, specific families are custodians of specific stories. Children are required to cross-check details with elders. There are social consequences for inaccurate retelling. The stories are not casual campfire tales. They are institutional knowledge. But it goes even further. In 2023, astronomer Dwayne Hamaker published a paper analyzing a story recorded in the 1830s from a Palawa elder in Tasmania. The elder described a star called Moini that used to sit near the South Celestial Pole. He laid spears in the sand and drew reference stars to triangulate its position. Hamaker identified the star as Canopus, the second brightest star in the sky, and due to Earth's wobble cycle, axial precession, Canopus was actually in that position approximately 14,000 years ago. That is not an approximation. That is a verifiable astronomical event encoded in an oral tradition passed down across roughly 560 generations. The colonial official who recorded the story had no knowledge of axial precession. He could not have fabricated the alignment. 14,000 years without writing, with accuracy. And then there is the Bujbim volcano in southeastern Australia. The Gunditjmara people have a creation story about a catastrophic eruption. Recent Argon dating places that eruption at approximately 37,000 years ago. If their story truly recalls that event, it would be the oldest oral tradition ever verified. Though that claim remains contested and conditional, the geological dating is solid. So, Aboriginal Australians can apparently preserve accurate information for at least 10 to 14,000 years, and possibly much longer. Neanderthals disappeared roughly 40,000 years ago, though isolated groups may have survived later in places like Gibraltar and the Iberian Peninsula, and maybe even further east. That still leaves a gap. The longest verified oral tradition is about 14,000 years. 40,000 is nearly 3 times that. And I want to be honest about this. That gap is real. It is the weakest link in the entire chain of reasoning. No one has proven that any story can survive that long. But here is what I keep coming back to. The argument does not actually require perfect transmission. It does not require a Homo sapiens grandmother 40,000 years ago telling her grandchildren about the Neanderthals and that exact story arriving intact in a Scandinavian troll legend. That is not how cultural memory works. What it requires is much simpler. It requires that encounters with a different kind of human being were so memorable, so visceral, that they left a permanent imprint on the way we tell stories about the wild. Not a specific story, an archetype, a template, a slot in the human imagination shaped like a powerful, hairy, almost human creature living at the edge of the known world. And that template got refreshed and reinforced by real encounters for as long as the encounters lasted. In some places, that might have been much more recently than 40,000 years ago. This brings me to one of the most fascinating and tragic figures in this whole story. A man named Boris Porshnev. Porshnev was a Soviet historian, not a crank. A Stalin Prize winner, a specialist in French peasant revolts of the 17th century. He corresponded with Fernand Braudel. Michel Foucault cited his work. He was one of the most respected historians in the Soviet Union. In 1957, reports of the Himalayan Yeti reached Moscow, and something clicked for Porshnev. He started collecting reports of the Almas, the Central Asian equivalent of the Yeti, and found something strange. The descriptions were remarkably consistent, and they sounded to him not like an ape, but like a human, a different kind of human. He published an article in Pravda. Over 1,000 reports flooded in from across the Soviet Union. He secured permission from the Soviet Academy of Sciences to form a formal commission to investigate. In 1958, they organized an expedition to the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan. The commission compiled a 400-page report concluding that the Almas was most likely a real creature living in the region between the Tian Shan, the Pamirs, and Mongolia. And then everything fell apart. The expedition's leader was more interested in botany than cryptids. More powerful figures in the scientific establishment, as one account puts it, subverted the original purpose. The report was locked away in the Moscow library for decades, and Porshnev proposed the idea that would destroy his career. He said the Almas were surviving Neanderthals. His theory was attacked, in one case in terms that doubted his sanity. The defense he wrote could not be published in Moscow. It had to appear in a literary magazine in Kazakhstan. In 1963, he produced a book summarizing the evidence. Only 180 copies of a preliminary version were circulated. The book essentially vanished. He died in 1972, his work forgotten. 2 years later, a posthumous book was published in French, co-authored with the cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans. The title was L'homme de Neanderthal est toujours vivant. Neanderthal man is still alive. Heuvelmans wrote in the introduction that both he and Porshnev were convinced of the existence of hairy wild men, but they disagreed on what they were. Heuvelmans thought it was an unknown ape. Porshnev insisted it was a human, specifically a Neanderthal survivor from the Pleistocene. The English translation of Porshnev's original report was finally published in 2021, 60 years after he wrote it. Now here is what haunts me about this story. Porshnev was wrong about Neanderthals still being alive. We know that. Brian Sykes, an Oxford geneticist, later tested 30 alleged Yeti and Bigfoot hair samples in his lab. Every single one belonged to a known animal: raccoons, horses, cows, bears. No mystery DNA, no unknown primate, nothing. But Porshnev was right about something else. He was right that the relationship between humans and Neanderthals was far deeper, far longer, and far more intimate than the science of his era recognized. In 1963, when he was circulating those 180 copies, the scientific consensus was that Neanderthals were dim-witted brutes who died out because they could not compete. No interbreeding, no overlap, no relationship. 60 years later, a Princeton team proves 200,000 years of recurring genetic exchange and says Neanderthals were not exterminated but absorbed. The man who suggested humans and Neanderthals had a deep, sustained connection was told he was insane. He never lived to see any of his vindication. There is another voice worth hearing on this. Jane Goodall, the most famous primatologist alive at the time, in an interview with Kuo in 2017, said something that stopped me cold. She said it is bizarre that no remains of Bigfoot have ever been found. Maybe, she said, it is a spiritual creature. And then she added, the closest I come when I think about what could it be is like the remnant of Neanderthals. In a separate interview with GQ in 2021, she told a story about visiting remote communities in Ecuador. She asked an interpreter to ask local hunters if they had ever seen a monkey without a tail. 3 hunters came back and said, yes, we have seen monkeys without tails. They walk upright and they are about 6 feet tall. The interpreter knew nothing about Bigfoot. Goodall then said, every single country has its version. Yeti, Yowie in Australia, wild man in China. So I don't know if it's perhaps a myth that stems from maybe the last of the Neanderthals. She did not claim proof. She held a door open. Now I need to be fair and walk through what does not work about this idea, because some of it really does not work. First and most obviously, Neanderthals were short. Average male height was about 5'5". Bigfoot is supposedly 7 to 10 feet tall. That is a massive discrepancy. You could argue that stories exaggerate over millennia, that a stocky, enormously powerful being becomes a giant in the retelling. That is plausible, but it is also convenient, and convenient explanations should make you cautious. Second, there is what I think of as the Australian paradox. Aboriginal Australians have the longest continuous culture on Earth, the most robust oral traditions we know of, and some of the oldest verified stories. If any culture should preserve Neanderthal memories, it would be them. And they do have wild man legends, the Yowie. But Australia was never home to Neanderthals or Denisovans. There were no archaic humans there to remember. The fact that the Yowie exists anyway, in the culture with the best memory on the planet and zero archaic human contact, is a serious problem for this theory. It suggests the wild man archetype might emerge from the human mind itself, not from species memory. Third, no ancient text anywhere describes a being with the specific physical features of a Neanderthal. No prominent brow ridge, no occipital bun, no barrel chest and short limbs. Wild man descriptions are generic. Tall, hairy, strong. They could describe anything or nothing. And fourth, there is a simpler explanation that works perfectly well. The wild man is what Carl Jung would call a shadow figure, the uncivilized self, the thing we fear we might become if we wander too far from the campfire. Every culture draws a line between civilization and wilderness, and every culture populates the wilderness side with something that looks uncomfortably like us, but is not quite us. You do not need a real Neanderthal encounter to generate that. You just need a human brain with a fear of the dark. These are real objections. I take them seriously. But there is something that keeps pulling me back, and I want to try to articulate what it is. The oldest piece of literature we have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, roughly 4,700 years old in oral form, and one of its central characters is Enkidu, a wild man, covered in hair, living among animals, innocent of human civilization. And how is he brought into the human world? Through sex with a human woman, after which the animals flee from him and he can never go back. A hairy, powerful, animal-affiliated being is irreversibly transformed through sexual contact with a human. He crosses a species boundary. He integrates into civilization. He gains wisdom but loses his wildness. That is not a description of a Neanderthal, but it is a remarkable structural echo of what we now know happened. Interbreeding, absorption, the wild ones becoming part of us. The oldest written story in human civilization contains exactly this motif, which means the oral tradition behind it is even older. How much older, we cannot say. I also keep coming back to the Almas, the Central Asian wild man that Porshnev spent his career investigating. Unlike Bigfoot, which is described as enormous and ape-like, the Almas in traditional accounts is described as more human, shorter, muscular, covered in reddish-brown hair, living in caves and mountains. Some researchers have noted that these descriptions are closer to Neanderthal anatomy than any other wild man tradition, and Central Asia is exactly where Neanderthal fossils have been found. The Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains, fossils in Uzbekistan, tool sites across the region. And speaking of that region, A 2025 paper confirmed through protein analysis that a mandible from Taiwan belonged to a Denisovan in subtropical Taiwan. Another paper extracted Denisovan mitochondrial DNA from dental calculus on the Harbin skull in China. Denisovans were far more widespread across Asia than we imagined even 5 years ago. And in 2024, a rib fragment from Baishiakars Cave in China was confirmed as Denisovan and dated to between 48,000 and 32,000 years ago. That is astonishingly recent. So in Asia, you had Neanderthals, Denisovans, possibly other unknown hominins, and early Homo sapiens, all sharing the same landscapes within the last 50,000 years. All interbreeding, all coexisting. That is the region where the Yeti, the Yeren, the Almas, and the Orang Pendek legends originate. I am not saying those legends are about Denisovans. I am saying the conditions for generating such legends were better than we ever realized. Now, where does all of this leave us? I think the honest answer is somewhere between definitely not and we cannot know. This is not a theory. It is a speculation. But it is a speculation built on a chain of reasoning where most of the links are actually solid. Link 1. Humans and Neanderthals coexisted and interbred for 200,000 years. Proven. Link 2. Those encounters would have been memorable. Almost certainly true. Two visibly different kinds of humans. Meeting, fighting, having children. Of course, that gets remembered. Link 3. Humans tell stories about important things. Obviously true. Link 4. Oral traditions can preserve real events for at least 10 to 14,000 years. Proven by Aboriginal Australian research. Link 5. The encounter memories could have survived for 40,000 years. Unproven. The gap between 14,000 and 40,000 years is real, and no one has bridged it. Link 6. Every culture on Earth has wild man legends. True, but also explainable by universal psychology. 5 strong links, 1 weak one, and 1 alternative explanation that works just fine without any Neanderthals at all. But what I find most compelling is not any single piece of evidence. It is the way the Princeton paper shifts the probability. Before 2024, you could imagine human-Neanderthal contact as a brief, forgettable event. A one-night stand of evolutionary history. Now we know it was a 200,000-year relationship. The encounters were not rare. They were the norm. For most of our existence as a species, there was another kind of human out there. And we knew about them, and they knew about us. If that does not generate stories, nothing does. Whether those stories can survive the distance between then and now, across 1,600 generations, across ice ages and migrations and the invention of agriculture and the rise and fall of every civilization that has ever existed, that is a different question. And the truthful answer is probably not intact. Almost certainly not as specific memories. But maybe, just maybe, as a shape, a template, a slot in the human imagination that was carved by real encounters and has never quite been filled by anything else. The beach is gone. The waves took it long ago. But something in our story still remembers the shape of the shore. If you are still watching this, you are the kind of person who does not need me to tell you what to think about this. You have got the evidence. You know the weaknesses. You can assign your own probability. The science is not going to stop here. New genomes are being sequenced, new fossils are being found, and the frontier of oral tradition research keeps pushing deeper into time. If you want to stay on the edge of what we are discovering about who we are and where we came from, there is always more waiting for you on this channel.